Alright, so in this lesson we are going to be learning how you can clean your code. And I know that most of the time I was guilty of doing this. I'm still guilty of doing it. Sometimes I keep on forgetting, I'm really in a hurry and I do this kind of stuff. So when you do a feature and you finish it, it's really important for you to not leave your code behind like a bunch of spaghetti. You want to clean it up, you want to kind of reformat it and make sure that it's clean. So I was leaving like unformatted code, logs, comments, and so it's like you kind of decide to say that, hey, today I'm cooking and I'm going to the kitchen. You cook, you do a mess, and then you eat, and then you leave the kitchen like that. You don't want to leave the mess behind. And this is how sometimes it happens with our code as well. We kind of get in the hurry of finishing the feature, making it, building it, but we never have this kind of habit of consistently cleaning the code behind us and making sure that the code doesn't have any kind of spaghetti left behind. So how I make sure to clean up my code is that I do it after a feature, or maybe I finish a class and I want to clean it up, or maybe I want to do a commit and I want to clean up my code. There are several points in which you can make sure that you follow these steps, but let's start exactly with what you can actually do. So first you can reformat the code using the shortcut in Android Studio. So if you go in File, Settings, and type here Format like this, you should end up with actually reformat, not only format, you should end up with this Ctrl-Alt-L on Windows, and on Mac it should be Command-Option-L, so something similar. And what this does is basically rearranges your code and optimizes the imports. So let's say that you kind of do write a lot of code and you kind of forget sometimes to have the correct indentation, or even just miss a space or two, or maybe press here and enter by mistake, and maybe this kind of parentheses is really offset like that. So you have this kind of issues that happen when you write a feature or you're in a really big hurry when writing. So what you can do, just go and press Ctrl-Alt-L, right? And you can see that the Android Studio has automatically refactored this code for me. So I can really show you the results here. If I go in my Git, you can see that what it done, it actually kind of rearranged this here. As you can see, it has also reduced the space here. So it has done a lot of space, a lot of things in my code. And another very cool thing about this automatic reformat is that it actually re-imports or kind of optimizes your imports in the sense that it removes any kind of redundant, unnecessary imports. So for the sake of it, let's copy some imports from the adapter, because right now, as you can see, there's no gray import here, so it's fine. We don't have any unnecessary imports, but let's say that we did, and we kind of have this kind of thing happening when you kind of import a lot of things. When you're trying to solve something, you use a library, and so a lot of objects, a lot of types, and you kind of end up with a lot of gray imports. So when you go and press Ctrl-Alt-L, Android Studio actually removes them for you, so you kind of make sure that you don't have any kind of redundant imports that really don't make sense in your class. Now, another thing that I really am keen on doing is I really check for my code to have any kind of commented code. I really want to remove that. So every time I commit or I want to refactor my code, I reformat it as I just shown you, but I also try to remove these commented lines that, I mean, they made sense when you were implementing the feature, but then you kind of decided you don't need them. So you can remove them now, just to make sure that you don't have any kind of unnecessary code. Because when people are going to be reading your code, you're not going to understand that, hey, is this code good? Should I remove it? Is it what's it there for, right? So you do this kind of all the people that are going to read your code are going to be confused with this kind of approach. And also with the logs, I mean, you use it to debug maybe at some point, or even to implement something, you should remove them. We really don't need any kind of logs here, and most importantly, don't put logs in production applications as a good rule of thumb. So this is something that I really look for. I kind of try to find unnecessary logs and comments. I try to remove them. And another thing that is really important and I really enjoy doing is trying to look out for variables that maybe were named poorly, because when you write a feature and you keep on adding stuff and you keep on reformatting, keep on extracting methods like we did, some namings kind of lose their meaning and they are not really that relevant to your method. So for example, here we have the method filter restaurants that has an input type of list of restaurants, but the name of the variable is parsed restaurants. Well, the filter doesn't really care that these are parsed restaurants. It really cares that it's a list of restaurants. So let's go here and press Shift F6 so you can rename this. Instead of going manually, we can do this kind of really cool trick. So if we, for example, let's abort this and let's do this by hand. If we do this, then the IDE is going to complain that, hey, you have to basically paste this here and all other places in the app, and I don't really want to do that. So let's do this with the awesome shortcut. So go and Shift F6 here and basically just type this as restaurant, right? Because again, the filter restaurants doesn't know that it's going to receive a filtered restaurants or a parse. It doesn't really care. He needs a list of restaurants. And again, the same thing we can do with the prepare restaurants. As you can see, it receives a filtered restaurants variable name here. It's not really that suggestive. Let's go and rename this to restaurants again as well, because it makes no sense for it to have filtered. It doesn't really care. It just needs restaurants here variable name. So right now it's much more suggestive. And what I do is that I look out for this kind of input parameters. I look out for methods. For example, this method here doesn't really make too much sense. It's called prepare restaurants, right? But it doesn't really make sense. Prepare them for what? Let's do the same thing. Press Shift F6 and let's call this display restaurant. Like this, display restaurants. And now it makes more sense, because if we go here in the chain of reaction, we see that we can parse them, we filter them, and at the end we display them. And this method doesn't return anything because it kind of displays them to the UI. So this is much more suggestive right now. This method is much more suggestive, and this is a practice that I usually do when I finish a feature or a small task. And so because it kind of makes sense to revise your code and to make sure that the variables are really suggestive for other, I don't know, programmers that are going to work on the project as well. And one more thing that I'm really keen on doing is I want to make sure that the methods are in the correct order in my class. So for example, in this activity, I want to make sure that the overridden methods are first. So even if I have overridden methods that are from the Android lifecycle, like this one, or I don't know, maybe overridden methods from an interface, I want to make sure that those are first. And then I want to make sure that I have public methods. So if this was a public method here, I would have basically made sure that the public is after overridden and before private. So after a public function, we have private functions. Luckily for us, we don't have any kind of public, but we can kind of make the inference and understand that we need overridden, public. Here, let's say if it had any kind of public functions and then private. And as we can see, we have an issue in our class here. We have a overridden method here that shouldn't be at the end. It shouldn't be after the private. It should be at the overridden, right? So if we go here, we can paste it here after the onCreate. And you might be asking right now, hey, Kotlin, but what if I have multiple overridden methods? Which of them is going to be first? Well, for example, for the methods that are overridden that are part of the lifecycle of Android, you want to make sure that the ones that are called first are going to be first in your class, because here onCreate is going to get called first, because that's what happens when the screen opens, and the onDisplay is going to happen afterwards at the end when you kind of close the screen. And so this is a good rule of thumb when you want to order methods, overridden methods. And again, if you have interface methods that you kind of implement here, you want to make sure that the lifecycle methods are first, like onCreate, onDestroy, onStart, onResume, and so, and then the other interface methods are implemented. So we are going to go in a more detailed example in a special lesson in this course. I guess that this was a very good introduction for that. All right, so what's important to take away in this particular lesson is that all of these actions that we talked about, reformatting the code, removing logs and comments, renaming variables, classes, and so, reordering the methods, all of these steps are important and they should be a habit. You should make a habit out of them every time you create a feature, every time you, I don't know, commit some code, some changes, every time you feel like doing them. And these are very, very important to keep your code clean.